I'm Alfred, 32 years old, and I never thought I'd have to choose between my health and my family. When severe back pain threatened my career as a physical therapist, I reluctantly asked my parents for help with surgery costs. "We just can't afford it," they said. 2 months later, they spent $75,000 on my sister's dream wedding. The betrayal cut deeper than any scalpel could. Let me tell you how I discovered what I was really worth to them. Before I begin my story, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt the sting of family favoritism. Now let me take you back to where it all started. Growing up in suburban Chicago, our family appeared normal from the outside. My father, Richard, worked as an accountant, methodical and precise with numbers, but somehow less calculating when it came to showing affection equally. My mother, Margaret, taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school, nurturing other people's children with a warmth that sometimes felt rationed at home. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable enough to never worry about necessities. From my earliest memories, I sensed the subtle difference in how my parents treated me versus my sister Grace. She arrived 4 years after me, a surprise blessing according to my mother, who would often recount the story of how she'd given up hope of having a daughter before Grace came along. Perhaps that's where it began, this unspoken hierarchy of love. When I received B's on my report card, my father would nod and say room for improvement. When Grace brought home the same grades, there would be celebratory ice cream and praise for her hard work. When I made the junior varsity basketball team, my parents attended games when convenient. When Grace joined the debate team, my father rearranged business trips and my mother volunteered as team chaperone. "Boys are tougher," my mother would explain whenever I showed disappointment. "They don't need as much encouragement." My father would add, "You're going to be fine no matter what, Alfred. Grace needs more support." I tried not to resent my sister for the disparity. It wasn't her fault, after all. Grace was smart, kind, and genuinely talented. She excelled in school, played violin beautifully, and had a natural charm that drew people to her. I loved her fiercely, and appointed myself her protector at school, warning off bullies and carrying her backpack when it looked too heavy for her small frame. Our relationship had its unique dynamic. I protected her physically, while she often protected me emotionally from our parents' oversight. When I broke our mother's favorite vase at 13, Grace claimed responsibility. When I missed curfew at 16, she created diversions to keep our parents distracted until I slipped in through the back door. The material differences were impossible to ignore, though. For my 16th birthday, I received driving lessons and access to our family's 8-year-old Honda. When Grace turned 16, our parents surprised her with a new Volkswagen Beetle, citing safety concerns about older vehicles. My high school graduation gift was $500 toward college expenses. Grace received a European backpacking trip. I didn't complain. Instead, I internalized the message that I needed to be self-sufficient. I worked part-time throughout high school at the local hardware store, saved aggressively, and applied for every scholarship available. By the time I left for State University, I had enough to cover my first-year expenses with minimal loans. College brought freedom and perspective. Away from the family dynamic, I thrived. I chose physical therapy as my major, inspired by the therapist who had helped me recover from a sports injury in high school. I liked the idea of healing people through movement, of being the person who helped others regain independence. The irony of this choice would only become apparent years later. While my peers received care packages and regular deposits to their bank accounts, I worked nights at the campus recreation center and summers at rehabilitation facilities. My parents called weekly, asking about classes but rarely offering financial support. When I mentioned textbook costs or unexpected lab fees, the conversation would shift to Grace's achievements at her private university, where they covered her full tuition. After graduation, I moved to Boston for a position at a respected rehabilitation clinic. The distance from Chicago provided both geographic and emotional space from my family. Our communication became less frequent but more pleasant, limited to major holidays and occasional phone calls. I built a life I was proud of, made friends who valued me, and eventually met Samantha, a pediatric nurse, whose straightforward nature and compassion captivated me. Samantha was the first person who clearly identified the pattern in my family relationships. After our first Thanksgiving together in Chicago, she asked on the drive back to our hotel, "Do you notice how your parents talk to you versus Grace? It's like they're having two different conversations. I had lived with it so long that I barely registered it anymore. What do you mean? They ask you about work like they're making small talk with an acquaintance. But with grace, they lean in, they follow up, they remember details from your last visit. They asked her 4 times if she needed anything, and not once did they ask you. Her observation stung because it crystallized what I had normalized. Still, I defended them. They know I can handle myself. I've always been independent. Samantha squeezed my hand. Being independent shouldn't mean being ignored, Alfred. You deserve attention too. That conversation planted a seed of awareness that would grow over the next 2 years, culminating in the series of events that forever changed my relationship with my family. But at the time, I simply filed away Samantha's observation and continued building our life together in Boston, maintaining the cordial but distant relationship with my parents that had become our standard. The pain started subtly, a dull ache in my lower back after long days demonstrating exercises to patients. As a physical therapist, I initially dismissed it as occupational hazard and treated myself with stretches and anti-inflammatory medications. By the time spring arrived, however, the pain had evolved into something more serious, shooting down my right leg and occasionally causing numbness in my foot. You need to see someone about this. Samantha insisted one morning when she found me on the bathroom floor unable to stand upright after a shower. This isn't normal. I reluctantly made an appointment with an orthopedic specialist expecting to be prescribed physical therapy, which I could essentially give myself. Instead, after MRIs and nerve conduction studies, I received a diagnosis that shocked me: severe herniated discs at L4, L5, and L5S1 with nerve compression requiring specialized surgery. Given your age and condition, you're an ideal candidate for minimally invasive microsurgery. Dr. Jenkins explained, showing me the MRI images of my compressed spinal nerves. But without intervention, you're looking at potential permanent nerve damage. This could end your career as a physical therapist. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent years helping others recover from similar conditions, and now I faced the same challenge. The specialist recommended a neurosurgeon who pioneered an advanced procedure with better outcomes and faster recovery times for cases like mine. When the financial counselor at the hospital reviewed the costs, I felt the floor drop beneath me. The specialized surgery would cost $120,000. My insurance would cover approximately 65% after deductibles, leaving me with an estimated $45,000 responsibility. The financial counselor offered payment plans, but even stretched over 2 years, the monthly payments would exceed my rent. You can always opt for the standard procedure, she suggested sympathetically. It's covered at a higher percentage. But the standard procedure carried higher risks of complications and a significantly longer recovery time. As a physical therapist, I knew all too well what that could mean for my future mobility and career. For weeks, I tried to solve the problem independently. I cut every unnecessary expense from my budget, picked up extra patients during morning hours when my pain was manageable, and researched medical loans. Samantha suggested moving in together to save on rent, which we had been considering anyway. These measures helped, but they barely made a dent in the amount I needed. Samantha finally said what I had been avoiding. You should talk to your parents. They might be able to help. They're planning for retirement, I countered. I can't ask them to compromise that. Just talk to them, she urged. They would want to know what you're going through regardless of whether they can help financially. After another week of worsening symptoms that forced me to reduce my client load, I finally picked up the phone one Sunday evening. My mother answered with her usual cheer, chatting about neighborhood gossip and Grace's recent promotion at her marketing firm before asking about my life in Boston. When I explained my medical situation, her tone instantly shifted to concern. Oh, Alfred, why didn't you tell us sooner? Are you in much pain? Is Samantha helping you? I downplayed the pain but was honest about the severity of the condition and the recommended treatment. When I mentioned the cost and my insurance coverage gap, there was a pause on the line. Let me get your father, she said. My father came on the phone, his accountant's mind immediately assessing the financial aspects. $45,000 is substantial, he said. What options have they given you for payment? I explained the hospital payment plan and the medical loans I had researched, both carrying interest rates, that would significantly increase the total cost over time. "We're a bit house poor right now," he said after another pause. "We refinanced last year to do some renovations, and we're trying to build our retirement accounts before I cut back to part-time." "I understand," I said quickly, already regretting the call. "I just thought I should let you know what's going on. I'm not expecting anything." No, we want to help if we can," my mother interjected, having apparently been listening on another extension. "We just need to look at our finances. Maybe we could help with some of it." "We'll see what we can do," my father added, his tone non-committal. "Send us the details from your doctor and we'll talk it over." After hanging up, I felt a mixture of disappointment and guilt. I hadn't expected them to immediately offer the full amount, but their hesitation stung nonetheless. Still, I reminded myself that $45,000 was a significant sum, and they were approaching retirement age. I sent them the medical reports and cost estimates as requested, then tried to put the matter out of my mind as I continued seeking other solutions. 2 weeks passed without any follow-up from my parents. When I finally called again, my mother apologized for the delay, explaining they had been swamped with some family matters but promised they were still considering how they might help. She changed the subject quickly, asking about Samantha and my plans for the summer. I didn't press the issue, sensing their discomfort with the topic. Little did I know that the family matters consuming their attention were about to become painfully clear to me. The news of Grace's engagement arrived via a group text from my mother. "Wonderful news. Grace and Bradley are engaged. Wedding next spring at the Palmer House in Chicago." Attached was a photo of my sister beaming a sizable diamond, glinting on her left hand beside a tall man with perfect teeth and a tailored suit. I knew Grace had been dating Bradley for about 6 months, having met him at a charity gala where her marketing firm had donated services. What I didn't know until my congratulatory call to her was how rapidly their relationship had progressed, or how elaborate their wedding plans already were. "He proposed at his family's lake house," Grace gushed. "Alfred, it was magical. His parents flew in from Arizona just for the weekend, and there were rose petals everywhere and a string quartet playing our song." I listened as she described Bradley's background, Ivy League education position at his father's investment firm, Family Connections, throughout Chicago's elite social circles. Their whirlwind romance had all the elements of a romantic comedy, including the meet-cute where she spilled champagne on his tuxedo and the subsequent courtship filled with helicopter rides to weekend getaways. "Mom and Dad are over the moon," she continued. "They're insisting on hosting an engagement dinner next month. You'll come, won't you? Bring Samantha, of course. Bradley's dying to meet my big brother." Despite the worsening pain in my back and the financial stress looming over me, I agreed to fly to Chicago for the dinner. Samantha offered to cover my ticket, understanding how important it was to maintain family connections, despite my parents' lukewarm response to my medical situation. The engagement dinner was held at an upscale restaurant overlooking Lake Michigan. I took extra pain medication to get through the evening, standing stiffly at the cocktail reception as Grace introduced Samantha and me to Bradley's extensive family. My parents fluttered around the room, my mother in a new dress. I'd never seen my father shaking hands with Bradley's father with unusual animation. During dinner, seated between Samantha and a cousin of Bradley's, I watched my parents transform into people I barely recognized. My typically reserved father gave an emotional toast about his little girl finding true happiness. My practical mother teared up discussing wedding venues and flower arrangements. They seemed to glow with pride and excitement in a way I couldn't remember seeing before. After the main course, feeling the need to stretch my back, I excused myself to walk around the restaurant's perimeter. Passing by a small alcove near the restrooms, I overheard my parents in conversation with Bradley's parents. "We're thinking about $75,000 for our contribution," my father was saying in a tone I recognized from his rare splurges on luxury items. "Margaret has always dreamed of giving Grace her perfect day." "It's worth every penny," my mother added warmly. "When you have a daughter, you imagine this day from the moment she's born. We've been saving for it her whole life." I froze, the pain in my back suddenly eclipsed by a new, sharper pain in my chest. $75,000. The amount was shocking, not just for its size, but for what it revealed about their earlier response to my medical needs. They hadn't been unable to help me. They had chosen not to. Somehow I made it through the remainder of the dinner without revealing what I'd heard. I smiled mechanically through dessert, hugged my sister, and shook hands with Bradley, and made appropriate noises about looking forward to the wedding. All the while the number $75,000 pounded in my head like a second heartbeat. On the taxi ride back to our hotel, Samantha noticed my unusual silence. "Is your back worse tonight?" I overheard something I said, then repeated the conversation I'd intercepted. "They're spending $75,000 on her wedding, Samantha, after telling me they couldn't help with my surgery." Samantha's expression shifted from confusion to anger. "That can't be right. Maybe you misheard." I didn't mishear. They were clear about the amount and their enthusiasm for spending it. "But your surgery, your health, your career, that's essential. Not a luxury," she protested. "A wedding is one day, but your back will affect the rest of your life." I stared out the taxi window at Chicago's glittering skyline, the city of my childhood, now feeling foreign and unwelcoming. Apparently Grace's one day is worth more than my entire future. That night in the hotel I couldn't sleep, despite the extra pain medication. The contrast between my parents' reluctance to help with my medical expenses and their eagerness to fund Grace's elaborate wedding forced me to confront the pattern of favoritism that had defined our family dynamic. This wasn't about differing financial circumstances or retirement planning. This was about value, about worth, about who deserved investment. The realization settled in my stomach like a stone in the economy of my parents' love. I had always been the discount option. The night after the engagement dinner, I barely slept. The pain in my back, exacerbated by travel and standing through the reception, kept me shifting uncomfortably on the hotel mattress. But the physical discomfort paled compared to the emotional pain gnawing at me. By morning, my eyes were swollen from a combination of sleeplessness and silent tears I hadn't realized I'd shed. Samantha watched me carefully as I struggled to dress for our flight back to Boston. "You need to talk to them before we leave," she said quietly. "This isn't something you can just let go." What would I say? "Thanks for the lovely dinner, and by the way, why is your daughter's party worth more than my ability to walk without pain?" "Yes, exactly that," Samantha replied, her nurse's directness cutting through my sarcasm. "You deserve an explanation." After checking out of the hotel, I called my parents and asked if we could meet for coffee before our afternoon flight. They agreed readily, suggesting a cafe near their home. My mother sounded pleased, probably assuming I wanted to discuss the wedding further. The cafe was quiet on a Sunday morning, sunlight streaming through large windows onto polished wooden tables. My parents arrived punctually, my mother still glowing from the previous evening's celebration. They greeted Samantha warmly and immediately launched into post-dinner analysis, discussing which of Bradley's relatives they had particularly liked and the preliminary wedding plans already taking shape. I let them talk, sipping my coffee and gathering courage. Finally, during a lull in the conversation, I set down my cup with deliberate care. "I need to ask you something," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "Last night I overheard you talking with Bradley's parents about contributing $75,000 to Grace's wedding." My mother's smile faltered slightly. My father's expression remained neutral, though his fingers tightened around his coffee mug. "Is that true?" I asked. My father cleared his throat. "We were discussing potential budgets. Nothing is finalized yet. But you're considering spending $75,000 on the wedding after telling me you couldn't help with my surgery costs." My mother glanced around the cafe nervously. "Alfred, this isn't the place to discuss family finances. I'm not trying to create a scene, Mom. I just want to understand. You told me you were house poor and focusing on retirement when I needed help for a medical necessity. But you've apparently been saving for Grace's wedding her whole life." My father shifted into what I recognized as his problem-solving posture, shoulders squared, voice lowered. "The situations are completely different, Alfred. Your medical situation, while unfortunate, has alternatives. Insurance payment plans, even a less expensive surgical option. The wedding is a once-in-a-lifetime event," my mother added. "Grace will only get married once, God willing." The casual dismissal of my health needs as merely unfortunate sent a surge of anger through me. "And I only have one spine, one career that depends on my physical ability. This isn't elective surgery, Dad. Without it, I could lose everything I've worked for." "You're being dramatic," my father countered. Plenty of people manage back problems without specialized surgeries. As a physical therapist, I'm uniquely qualified to know that's not always true. And in my specific case, the specialist was clear about the risks of delaying treatment. My mother reached across the table, her hand stopping short of touching mine. We want to help you, Alfred, we do. But our financial circumstances are different now than they were when you were growing up. We have more flexibility. More flexibility for Grace, you mean? That's not fair, my father interjected. Grace has different needs than you do. She always has. Because she's the daughter you always wanted. I said the words escaping before I could filter them. My mother's face flushed. That's a terrible thing to say. We love both our children equally. But you don't treat us equally. You never have. The dam had broken now, years of accumulated hurt flowing freely. My entire life I've watched Grace receive opportunities, support, and yes, money that were never offered to me. I worked through college while you paid her full tuition. I bought my own first car while you surprised her with a new one. I built my career with minimal help while you networked for her, celebrated every small achievement. You never needed the help, my father argued. You were always independent, capable. I was those things because I had to be. What choice did I have? Samantha, who had been silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke. I think what Alfred is trying to express is that independence shouldn't be penalized. He's always taken care of himself, yes, but this surgery is beyond what anyone should handle alone. My father turned to her with a tight smile. With all due respect, Samantha, this is a family matter. She is family, I snapped. She's been more supportive of me during this medical crisis than either of you. My mother's eyes welled with tears, her go-to response when confronted with conflict. You're making it sound like we don't care about you, Alfred. That's simply not true. We're proud of the man you've become. But not proud enough to invest in my health the way you're investing in Grace's wedding day. I think you're jealous of your sister's happiness, my father said flatly. This isn't really about the money. It's about you feeling left out of the celebration. The accusation was so wildly off base that I actually laughed, a sharp sound without humor. I'm happy for Grace. I've always supported her, celebrated her. What I'm not happy about is discovering where I truly stand in this family's priorities. I stood up, wincing at the sharp pain shooting down my leg. We need to go or we'll miss our flight. Thank you for the coffee. My mother started to protest, but my father placed a hand on her arm. Let him cool off. He'll come around once he thinks about this rationally. We left the cafe without hugs or the usual promises to call soon. In the taxi to the airport, the adrenaline of confrontation faded, leaving me exhausted and somehow hollower than before. Samantha held my hand silently, offering the comfort of her presence without platitudes. By the time we landed in Boston, my phone contained 5 text messages, 2 from my mother, insisting they loved me equally and wanted to help in ways that make sense. 1 from my father suggesting I was making mountains out of molehills, and 2 from Grace asking what had happened after we left and why Mom was upset. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I turned off my phone and focused on the immediate problem, finding $45,000 for a surgery I couldn't postpone much longer. Later that evening, Grace called Samantha's phone when mine went straight to voicemail. I reluctantly agreed to speak with her. What happened with Mom and Dad? She asked, her voice a mixture of concern and confusion. They said you were upset about wedding costs. I explained the situation as neutrally as possible, not wanting to taint her excitement about her engagement, but needing her to understand my perspective. Oh, she said when I finished. There was a long pause. I didn't realize your back was that serious. Mom just said you were having some pain. It's serious enough that I might not be able to continue working if it isn't addressed soon. I'm sure they want to help you, Grace said, her voice taking on the placating tone she'd often used when mediating family tensions. Maybe there was a misunderstanding about the urgency. The misunderstanding was mine, I replied. I misunderstood my place in this family. Don't say that, Alfred. They love you. I know they do in their way. But love should translate to support when it's truly needed. Grace promised to talk to our parents to help them understand the seriousness of my condition. I thanked her, but harbored no real hope that anything would change. The pattern was too established, the roles too deeply entrenched. After hanging up, I made a difficult decision. For my own mental health. I needed to distance myself from my family while I focused on solving my medical crisis. No more weekly calls, no participation in wedding planning discussions, no pretending that everything was normal when it so clearly wasn't. The distance hurt, but not nearly as much as the alternative, continuing to hope for support that would never materialize. As summer progressed, my medical condition deteriorated rapidly. The pain became a constant companion, stealing my sleep, limiting my mobility, and eventually forcing me to take unpaid leave from the clinic. My supervisor was understanding, but concerned about the long-term viability of my position if I couldn't perform the physical aspects of the job. "Take the time you need to get better," he told me during a difficult conversation in his office. "Your job will be here when you're ready to return. But Alfred, you need to address this soon." With my income reduced to disability payments that barely covered rent, the surgery seemed increasingly out of reach. Samantha and I explored every possible financial avenue. I applied for assistance programs through the hospital, researched medical tourism options in countries with lower healthcare costs, and even considered liquidating my modest retirement savings despite the penalties. Eventually, I secured a medical loan with a 14% interest rate, a financial burden that would follow me for years but seemed the only viable option. Friends from the clinic organized a small fundraiser that generated nearly $3,000. Samantha offered her savings of $12,000, which I initially refused but eventually accepted as a loan I promised to repay. "We're building a life together," she reminded me. "Your health is our shared priority." With cobbled-together financing in place, I scheduled the surgery for early October, a full 5 months after my initial diagnosis. The delay concerned my neurosurgeon, who warned about the increased risk of permanent nerve damage, but acknowledged it was better than further postponement. Meanwhile, Grace's wedding plans escalated in both scale and expense. The detailed updates arrived regularly via family group texts and social media posts. A designer gown from New York, custom-made bridesmaid dresses, a renowned Chicago florist, a 10-piece band for the reception. Each announcement served as a painful reminder of my parents' priorities. In late August, thick, cream-colored envelopes arrived for Samantha and me containing formal invitations to Grace's wedding. The date October 5th, one day after my rescheduled surgery. I called Grace immediately. "I won't be able to attend. I have surgery scheduled for October 4th. Her disappointment was palpable. "Can't you reschedule? This is my wedding, Alfred. I need my brother there." "This surgery has already been delayed too long," I explained. "I'm at risk for permanent nerve damage. The date was the earliest the surgeon could accommodate me." "But you're supposed to be a groomsman. Bradley specifically included you in the wedding party." "I'm sorry, Grace. I physically cannot be there. I'll be in a hospital bed." She was quiet for a moment. "Mom and Dad think you scheduled it deliberately to make a point." The accusation stung so absurd it nearly took my breath away. "Yes, Grace, I arranged to have crippling back pain and endangered my career just to spite you. That makes perfect sense. You don't have to be sarcastic. They're hurt that you've been so distant since the engagement dinner." "I've been distant because I'm in constant pain and working to solve a medical crisis largely on my own. The world doesn't revolve around your wedding." The conversation ended awkwardly, with Grace promising to work something out so I could participate somehow. I hung up feeling both guilty for disappointing her and angry that my health crisis was being treated as an inconvenient scheduling conflict. 2 weeks before the surgery, the final blow came. My mother called, her voice bright with excitement. "We have wonderful news. Dad and I are sending Grace and Bradley to Bali for their honeymoon, 2 weeks at a private villa with their own butler. Isn't that fabulous?" I listened numbly as she detailed the luxury accommodations, the exclusive excursions, the approximate cost of $15,000 for the honeymoon package. When she finally paused for breath, I said the only thing I could think of. "That's very generous of you. We wanted to do something special. Bradley's parents are handling the rehearsal dinner, which is going to be quite lavish." "Mom," I interrupted, "I'm having major surgery in 2 weeks. I might lose my career if it doesn't go well. Does that register at all with you?" Her tone shifted immediately to defense. "Of course it does. We've been praying for you every day. Dad and I were just discussing whether we might be able to help with some of your expenses." After paying for the wedding and now a luxury honeymoon, we could probably manage 5,000, she offered. If you agree to come to the wedding, Grace is heartbroken that you're missing it. The conditional nature of the offer tied to my attendance at an event I physically couldn't attend was the final confirmation of where I stood in the family hierarchy. I'll be in post-operative recovery, Mom. The surgery is the day before. Well, perhaps you could come just for the ceremony in a wheelchair. The church is accessible. I ended the call shortly after, unable to continue the conversation, without saying things I might regret. $5,000 with strings attached versus $75,000 plus $15,000, given freely with joy. The math was simple, the message clear. 3 days later, while attempting to demonstrate a simple exercise to a colleague who was covering my patients, my back seized completely. The pain was so intense that I collapsed in the clinic, unable to stand or even crawl to a chair. An ambulance was called and I was taken to the emergency room, Samantha meeting me there after being notified by my coworkers. The emergency room doctor reviewed my records and examined me with growing concern. "You should have had this surgery months ago," he said bluntly. "The nerve compression has worsened significantly. We need to admit you and consult with neurosurgery immediately." Through a haze of pain and medication, I consented to hospital admission. Samantha, ever practical, contacted my parents despite my weak protests. "They should know you're hospitalized regardless of everything else," she insisted. My parents arrived the following morning, having taken the first available flight from Chicago. Their faces showed genuine concern. As they entered my hospital room, my mother immediately moving to my bedside, while my father stood awkwardly at the foot of the bed. "Oh, Alfred," my mother said, her eyes scanning the IV lines and monitoring equipment. "We had no idea things had gotten this bad." "I told you how serious it was," I replied, my voice hoarse from pain medication. "Yes, but not that you were at the point of collapse," my father countered. "We would have come sooner if we'd known." The conversation that followed was surreal. They expressed appropriate concern about my condition, asked detailed questions of the doctors, and then incredibly segued into updates about wedding preparations. The florist had a crisis with the orchid shipment, my mother mentioned, as if we were having a normal family chat. "And Grace is beside herself that you won't be there. She's thinking of setting up a video call so you can see the ceremony from your hospital room." I stared at them, wondering if the pain medications were causing me to hallucinate the conversation. "Mom, Dad, I'm facing emergency surgery. The doctor says there's increased risk because of the delay. My career is in jeopardy. Can we not talk about flower arrangements right now?" They exchanged glances and my father cleared his throat. "Son, we've been thinking about your situation. We want to help. We can offer $5,000 toward your medical expenses." "Thank you," I said, too exhausted to point out that it was less than 7% of what they were spending on Grace's wedding, or that it wouldn't even cover my hospital deductible. "We'd need you to make an effort with the wedding, though," my mother added. "It would break Grace's heart if you weren't involved somehow." And there it was again, the conditional support, the prioritization of Grace's feelings over my physical well-being. In that moment, lying in a hospital bed with uncertain prospects for recovery, I made my decision. "I appreciate the offer," I said carefully, "but I'll manage the expenses myself." My mother looked shocked. "You're refusing our help." "I'm declining help that comes with conditions. My attendance at a wedding isn't something I can guarantee when I'm facing a spinal surgery with unpredictable recovery." "This family has always supported each other," my father said, his tone hardening. "Grace would do anything for you if the situations were reversed." "I believe she would," I agreed. "But you and Mom have made your priorities clear. I need to focus on my health now, without additional emotional complications." They left shortly after, my mother in tears, my father tight-lipped with disapproval. As the door closed behind them, I felt an unexpected sense of peace, despite the physical pain and uncertain future. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I had prioritized my own well-being over the need to maintain family harmony at any cost. The neurosurgeon who evaluated me in the hospital confirmed what the emergency room doctor had suspected: the delay in treatment had resulted in increased nerve compression, elevating both the risks of surgery and the potential for incomplete recovery. "We need to operate within 48 hours, Dr. Patel explained, reviewing my latest MRI results. I've canceled my other cases to accommodate this emergency. The surgery was scheduled for the following afternoon, coincidentally still one day before Grace's wedding. From my hospital bed, I made final arrangements for the financial aspects, accepting Samantha's savings and finalizing the high-interest medical loan that would take years to repay. When Samantha stepped out to call her parents, I received a text from Grace. "Please reconsider coming to the wedding. We could delay the ceremony until later in the day. Mom and Dad said they offered to help with your surgery if you would make the effort. Why are you being so difficult about this?" I stared at the message for several minutes, struggling to formulate a response that wouldn't damage our relationship permanently. Finally, I wrote back, "Grace, I'm having emergency spinal surgery tomorrow. The doctors say I'll be heavily medicated and immobile for at least 24 to 48 hours afterward. This isn't about being difficult or making a point. It's about a serious medical condition that threatens my ability to walk normally and continue my career. I love you, and I wish you a beautiful wedding day. But I physically cannot be there, and I won't accept conditional financial help that prioritizes your wedding over my health." Her response came quickly. "You've changed since you moved to Boston. The Alfred I grew up with would never miss his sister's wedding no matter what. I guess Samantha has turned you against family." The unfairness of this accusation was so profound that I simply turned off my phone rather than escalate the situation. Samantha returned to find me staring at the ceiling, tears sliding silently down my face. "What happened?" she asked, immediately concerned. I showed her the text exchange. Her expression hardened as she read, but her voice remained gentle. "This isn't about you changing Alfred. It's about you finally recognizing your own worth." The surgery the next day lasted 5 hours, complicated by the advanced state of nerve compression. I woke in the recovery room with Samantha beside me, her face showing relief when I squeezed her hand weakly. "Dr. Patel said it went as well as could be expected," she reported. "There was more damage than they anticipated, but they were able to decompress the nerves successfully." Through the fog of anesthesia and pain medication, I registered that the date was October 4th, the day before Grace's wedding. "Time," I mumbled. "It's almost 7 in the evening," Samantha replied. "You've been out for a few hours." I nodded slightly, the movement sending a wave of nausea through me. "Wedding tomorrow." "Don't worry about that now," she soothed. "Focus on your recovery." Despite Samantha's advice, the wedding remained a shadow over the following day. Nurses came and went, adjusting medications and checking vital signs. Physical therapists visited to explain the recovery protocol that would begin once I was stabilized. Throughout it all, my phone remained off, a deliberate barrier between my healing body and the family drama unfolding across the country. Samantha's phone, however, buzzed periodically, with updates from a nursing school friend who was attending the wedding as a distant connection of Bradley's family. The ceremony proceeded as planned, apparently beautiful and flawless. My absence was explained to guests as a medical emergency, with no further details provided. Late that evening, feeling slightly more coherent after a day of rest, I asked Samantha to turn on my phone. There were numerous missed calls and messages, primarily from my mother and Grace. I scrolled through them without reading most, until one from an unexpected source caught my attention, a group text from my physical therapy colleagues. Surgery fund reached $24 Kelvin donations still coming in from patients past and present. Your PT family has your back, literally. Rest and heal, we've got you covered. I stared at the screen in disbelief. My coworkers had expanded their initial small fundraiser into a community-wide campaign, reaching out to patients I had treated over the years, many of whom had apparently contributed generously to help the therapist who had once helped to them. Samantha smiled at my shocked expression. "They called me last week about it, but swore me to secrecy. They wanted it to be a surprise." $24,000, I whispered, the amount almost unreal to me. Combined with Samantha's savings and some assistance from her parents who had offered their guest room for my recovery, the overwhelming medical debt I had anticipated suddenly became manageable. The contrast between the conditional $5,000 my parents had offered and the unconditional $24,000 from colleagues and former patients crystallized something I had been struggling to articulate. Family isn't defined by blood alone, but by actions, by showing up when it matters most, by valuing another person's well-being above convenience or cost. The day after the wedding, my former clinical mentor, Dr. Richardson, visited my hospital room. At 72, he had retired from practice, but still maintained connections throughout the medical community. "I heard about your situation," he said without preamble, "both the medical and financial aspects. I've made some calls to the Harrington Medical Foundation. They have a program for healthcare providers facing career-threatening conditions. They're reviewing your case tomorrow, but I've been assured they'll cover the remaining costs of your surgery and rehabilitation." I was speechless, overwhelmed by this unexpected lifeline from a man I hadn't seen in nearly 2 years. "You were one of my most promising students," he continued gruffly. "The profession needs therapists like you. Consider this an investment in the patients you'll help over the next 30 years. As he left, I realized I was experiencing something novel, the feeling of being valued, of being worthy of investment, of having my future considered important enough to protect. The contrast with my family's response couldn't have been more stark. Over the following days, as I began the challenging early stages of recovery, I made peace with a difficult truth. The family I had been born into might never provide the unconditional support I needed, but the family I had chosen and built around me in Boston had demonstrated its strength and commitment when it mattered most. I decided to focus my limited energy on healing and expressing gratitude to those who had stepped forward to help, rather than continuing to seek validation from parents who seemed fundamentally unable to provide it. It wasn't an easy decision, and it carried its own grief, but it was necessary for both my physical and emotional recovery. My parents called the hospital daily, and I spoke with them, briefly accepting their expressions of concern without engaging in deeper discussions about the family dynamics that had led to this point. Grace and Bradley departed for their Bali honeymoon, 3 days after the wedding, and the family group text filled with photos of tropical beaches and luxury accommodations. I muted the conversation and turned instead to the cards and messages from colleagues, friends, former patients, and Samantha's family, surrounding myself with evidence that I was valued, supported, and worthy of care, even if that care came from unexpected sources. As I began the slow process of physical recovery, I found myself undergoing an equally important emotional rehabilitation, learning to recognize my own worth, independent of my family's ability to acknowledge it. Recovery from spinal surgery proved even more challenging than I had anticipated, despite my professional knowledge of the rehabilitation process. The first 2 weeks were a blur of pain management, limited mobility, and the humbling experience of needing help with basic tasks. Samantha took family leave to assist with my initial recovery, her nursing skills proving invaluable as she monitored medications, wound care, and early mobility exercises. When I was discharged from the hospital, we moved temporarily into her parents' home in a Boston suburb, where they had converted their ground-floor den into a bedroom to eliminate the need for stairs. Their kindness overwhelmed me, particularly given that we had only met a handful of times before my medical crisis. "Family helps family," Samantha's father said simply when I tried to express my gratitude. "And your family now." The contrast with my own parents' conditional support was impossible to ignore. They continued to call regularly, expressing appropriate concern about my recovery, but never acknowledging the larger issues that had created the rift between us. My mother would often end calls with wistful comments about how much they missed hearing from me like before, as if my reduced communication were a mysterious phenomenon rather than a direct result of their actions. Grace returned from her honeymoon and sent a gift basket with a card expressing hopes for my speedy recovery so we could put this unfortunate timing behind us. The phrasing suggested she still viewed my surgery as an inconvenient scheduling conflict rather than a life-altering medical emergency. I maintained polite but distant contact with all of them, focusing my limited energy on physical rehabilitation. 6 weeks after surgery, I progressed from a walker to a cane. At 8 weeks, I began part-time work at the clinic, limited to administrative tasks and supervising therapy assistants. The nerve damage from the delayed surgery meant recovery would be slower than ideal, with some potential permanent limitations, but Dr. Patel was cautiously optimistic about my eventual return to full clinical duties. Throughout this period, I continued to receive support from unexpected sources: Colleagues organized meal deliveries during the early weeks of recovery. Former patients sent encouraging messages about how my work had helped them through their own rehabilitation journeys. Samantha's family included me in holiday plans without question or qualification. The Harrington Medical Foundation covered the remaining surgical costs and connected me with specialists for ongoing rehabilitation. These acts of generosity forced me to reconsider my understanding of family. For years, I had accepted the narrative that independence meant isolation, that being strong meant requiring minimal support. Now I was learning that true strength sometimes means accepting help, and that family can be defined by actions rather than merely by blood. 3 months after the surgery, my parents announced plans to visit Boston. "We want to see how you're doing," my mother explained over the phone, "and we have some things we'd like to discuss in person." They arrived on a cold January afternoon, visibly shocked at my continued use of a cane, and the careful way I lowered myself into a chair at the restaurant where we met for lunch. Perhaps seeing the physical evidence of my condition finally made the seriousness of the situation real to them in a way my words had not. "You look like you're still in pain," my mother observed, concern evident in her expression. "The recovery is progressing," I replied neutrally. "But there was nerve damage from the delay in treatment. Some effects may be permanent." My father cleared his throat. "We've been doing a lot of thinking since your surgery, and some talking with Grace, who feels terrible about how everything unfolded with the wedding. We may have mishandled things," my mother added, her eyes downcast. "We never intended to suggest that Grace's wedding was more important than your health." "But that's exactly what you communicated," I said quietly. "Not just with words, but with actions. $75,000 for her wedding, $15,000 for her honeymoon, but only $5,000 offered conditionally for my medical crisis." They exchanged glances and my father sighed. "We've always treated you and Grace differently, that's true. But we genuinely believed it was because you needed less from us. You were always so capable, so independent." "I became independent because I had to," I explained. "When support isn't offered, you learn to stop expecting it." My mother reached for my hand across the table. "We're sorry, Alfred. We got it wrong. We've talked about it extensively since your surgery, especially after learning how serious the situation really was. We'd like to make amends," my father added. "We've set aside money to help with your ongoing medical expenses and rehabilitation costs." I looked at them thoughtfully, recognizing the genuine remorse in their expressions. Part of me wanted to accept their offer, to believe that this represented a true shift in our family dynamic. But another part, the part that had been protecting my emotional well-being these past months, remained cautious. "I appreciate that," I said finally, "but I've managed the financial aspects of my treatment. What I really needed from you wasn't money, but recognition that my health and future were priorities worth supporting without conditions." "We understand that now," my mother said, tears forming. "We just want a chance to do better, to be part of your life again." "I'm not excluding you from my life," I clarified, "but our relationship needs to change. I can't go back to pretending everything is fine when it isn't, or accepting unequal treatment as normal." We talked for nearly 3 hours, covering ground that should have been addressed years earlier. There were difficult moments. Defensiveness from my father, tears from my mother, and admissions from me about resentments I had carried silently for too long. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, but it was an honest conversation that laid groundwork for a potentially healthier relationship. 2 weeks after their visit, I took another significant step in my recovery. I proposed to Samantha. After witnessing her unwavering support through the darkest period of my life, I knew with absolute certainty that she was the person I wanted to build a future with. We planned a small ceremony for the following fall, when I would hopefully be able to walk without assistance. When I called my parents with the news, their response was warm, but contained an all too familiar question: "Will Grace be in the wedding party? She's so good at planning these things." I took a deep breath before responding. "Samantha and I are keeping it very small. No formal wedding party, and we're paying for everything ourselves." "But we'd like to contribute," my mother protested. "It's traditional for the parents to help." "Thank you, but no. This needs to be something we do our way, on our terms." There was a pause before my father spoke. "We understand, but know the offer stands if you change your mind." It was a small moment, but significant. For perhaps the first time, they had accepted my boundary without prolonged argument or guilt-inducing comments. It wasn't complete transformation, but it was progress. As spring arrived, bringing with it improved mobility and reduced pain, I reflected on the lessons of the past year. The experience had forced me to confront painful truths about my family relationships, but it had also revealed the depth and breadth of support available from my chosen family of friends, colleagues, and future in-laws. I returned to full-time work at the clinic, with some modifications to accommodate my ongoing recovery. The first day back, my colleagues presented me with a framed collage of messages from patients who had contributed to my surgery fund, many expressing how my work had helped them through their own medical challenges. It hangs now in my office, a daily reminder that the impact we have on others often returns to us in unexpected ways. My relationship with my parents continues to evolve, sometimes progressing, sometimes sliding back into old patterns. Grace and I maintain contact, though, with a new honesty about the different ways we were raised and the impact those differences had on both of us. She has begun to recognize the favoritism that shaped our childhood, though she struggles with the guilt that comes with that awareness. The most profound change, however, has been internal. I no longer measure my worth by my parents' willingness to invest in me. I no longer accept unequal treatment as inevitable, and I no longer confuse independence with isolation. Family, I've learned, is not defined solely by blood relations or legal ties. True family consists of those who show up when it matters most, who value your well-being as worthy of protection and investment, who see your pain as their concern. Sometimes that includes the people we're born to, and sometimes it doesn't. The freedom lies in recognizing the difference and building boundaries accordingly. As I prepare for my wedding to Samantha and look toward our shared future, I carry this wisdom with me. We can't choose the family we're born into, but we can choose how we define family moving forward, and that choice makes all the difference. Have you ever had to establish boundaries with family members who didn't treat you fairly? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real-life experiences. And consider sharing this with someone who might need to be reminded that they deserve equal love and support. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, but by how you choose to value yourself.